Hey guys, Kalablade here again, and I've got another unboxing KalaVlog for you, where we'll be unboxing another big box PC game from my collection. What we have here is the original Forgotten Realms SSI Gold Box Trilogy, all together in one box. Now, a lot of my younger viewers, or people who are less familiar with classic DOS or Dungeons & Dragons games in general, might have heard of the spiritual successor, at least in my opinion, to this series, which is the Baldur's Gate series by BioWare. More about that another time. Originally kicked off in 1988, the year my wife was born, Pool of Radiance, followed by Curse of the Azure Bonds, Secret of the Silver Blades, and finally, in 1991, wasn't even out yet when this box was released, Pools of Darkness, the one I still need to add to my collection. I first played around with these games when I was about 8, right around 7 and 8, yet again, sort of my first couple of formative PC gaming years. And we had the Commodore 64 versions of these three games. So this gave me an early first glimpse into Dungeons & Dragons and the world of the Forgotten Realms, specifically, which is where these particular games take place, which is probably the most popular Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting of them all, arguably. As it turns out, getting all of these games in the individual boxes would actually be way more expensive than it was for me to get this one box with the first 3 of the original games in it. Now, it's probably just a really good deal that I happened to stumble upon, and the guy who was selling it was very generous in accepting a lower offer too than what he was asking, and I ultimately wound up paying a very good price for these. Why don't we go ahead and see what's inside here then? Inside we got all 3 games on a stack of floppies, 2 for Pool of Radiance and Curse of the Azure Bonds respectively, and 1 floppy disk for Secret of the Silver Blades. And then a huge stack of manuals, hint books, and whatnot. This being an advanced Dungeons & Dragons game, it follows the rules to a T, which was one of the big drawing points for gamers back when this came out, who were already fans of Dungeons & Dragons. Now this thing is pretty full, not only with lore about the game and the basic rules, but also the different character classes, races, stuff about the menu in-game, whatnot. That's pretty cool. Now this was actually sold separately originally, and I don't believe they even came in this box. I could be incorrect there, but the eBay seller that I bought this from mentioned how these were sold separately, and they are indeed correct, so I think these are from their original collection. And this is the official Pool of Radiance clue book, which is pretty nifty on its own, and I'll probably refer to this when I finally get around to seriously trying to tackle this trilogy of games, because I really, really want to. And then this is essential to even play the game, and that's the Adventurer's Journal, which I had forgotten about this thing, having done very little serious playing of this trilogy when we actually owned it before. But this, you can't even play the game without, because there are certain things in the game which are going to ask you to refer to specific entries in here, which might have to do with something you see in-game or something you encounter, proclamations you'll find around the town, maps, journal entries, etc. And it's my understanding that there are even fake entries in here just to stop people from cheating, which is pretty intense, and was one of the ways they could get around that back then. Now we have the main book for the second game in the trilogy, Curse of the Azure Bonds, which is one of my favorite pieces of late 80s advanced Dungeons & Dragons artwork from Clyde Caldwell. Which, of course, my wife had to point out you can tell it's the 80s because of her hair there. And you gotta love the practicality of her armor. But anyways, I always thought this was just a super cool picture, and I always loved this book. And I remember I used to look at these maps and just kind of read through these to learn what I could about playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons as a little kid, because at that point I was still too young to join in the games that my brother and sister were playing in. So this was one of my windows into that world that I could kind of explore on my own, even though I was pretty young and did not make it very far in these games, for sure. We got the Adventurer's Journal for Azure Bonds, which is more of the same as the other Adventurer's Journal. This one's pretty cool. The rule book for the third game, Secret of the Silver Blades, which I believe was my older sister's personal favorite of this trio. We got the Adventurer's Journal for Secret of the Silver Blades, which is pretty awesome. You can see all the maps and different entries in here. Some of this artwork is pretty badass. You've got the bestiary of the game, the different monsters, many of which will look really familiar to seasoned Dungeons & Dragons players. And I think even this artwork, yeah, I know that picture, is artwork from some of the original AD&D books from back when these games were coming out too. So a lot of nostalgia right here in this box for me, once again, just like the last unboxing. And then we also have another clue book that was included in this box for the third game, which means I'm only missing the clue book for the middle entry in the trilogy. And like the other one, this one is super duper meaty. Very cool. I mean, look at these maps. I mean, some of these ruins and dungeons that you explore. I mean, this game does not mess around, and was definitely more for, I think, the hardcore gamers, which is why, you know, you have the advanced part of AD&D, which is exactly what this game is. Quite advanced for its time, and really cool, but I don't think would be the easiest game for somebody to pick up, particularly now, unless they're serious about D&D or retro gaming. And if that's the case, all of these are on GOG. Even the ones that I don't intend on collecting that go beyond the Forgotten Realms computer games that SSI did, that go into like the Dragonlance campaign setting. I believe they did one for Dark Sun, and possibly one or two others, but I know for a fact that after the Forgotten Realms they did Dragonlance, which is probably the second most popular campaign setting at the time, at least. We also have in here the quick start guides for getting the games to run back when they came out. Includes the system requirements, installing the game, whether or not you want to save your game on a floppy or onto a hard disk. It deals with the write protection and all that stuff, which we'll get into in a moment. You got the key maps there, which would have come in handy when I was trying to get the game to run earlier. I didn't even think to look in the box at this, which would have told me exactly what I needed to know. Instead, I looked it up online, like somebody from nowadays, instead of, you know, doing it old school, like this game is. So, this is for Secret of the Silver Blades, which is the only one that doesn't have copy protection, where you use these nifty translation wheels. Now, anybody who played DOS games, or even beforehand on some of the other systems like Commodore and whatnot, will recognize these. And this is how computer games used to get around copy protection back in the day, because anybody could theoretically, you know, put stuff on a floppy, and piracy was a big deal back then with floppy games, particularly on systems like the Commodore 64. So what you would do is when you start up the game, it will give you a series of symbols, and it'll basically say to match up, for example, this symbol on the outer ring with this rune, and then you'd rotate it around, and then it would tell you to read the word on one of these three lines. And if you look carefully, when you rotate, the letters in the windows change, and that changes the word that you would use to unlock the game that time that you're playing. And the words, you know, can vary. I know Wyvern's one of the ones in here, Dragon. So it'll basically say to match up the things on the code wheel, and then you enter your word and you're good to go. Now, the guy who I bought this from, I thought there was a code wheel for each game, but as it turns out, there's actually doubles for Pool of Radiance. He said he threw in his extra Pull of Radiance wheel from his single copy that he had owned, which was very nice and generous of him. So it looks like I've got 2 for Pull of Radiance, even though upon first glance I wasn't paying too much attention. I thought it was 1 for each game, but I guess they did away with that and do something else in Silver Blade. So, and this is the one for Curse of the Azure Bonds, which is it's not stained, it's just a different kind of material. And I recall the ones on the Commodore 64 looking and feeling more like this, rather than these more hefty ones. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, if you were part of the group of people who were playing these back then. I should also mention, if you get these games on GOG, all of this that we've looked at is included digitally, so you'll be up and running as soon as you buy the games. And that really is the ideal way to play these old games, because these floppy disks aren't going to last forever, and the magnetic data here does wear out over time, which is why I will be making my own personal backup disks of these. Because yes, I do have actually a stack, probably this long still, of floppy disks. Many of them aren't blank, still filled with random crap from back when I was a kid on the first Pentium that my family owned, probably. So I'll have to go through some of those later and see if I can't find a few to back up these games on, because it's definitely worth it. And last but not least, I love these things. This is a catalog for other computer games made by the company, and this is the 1991 catalog we have right here. So I would have been that's the year I turned 4 years old, so that gives you an idea of my age, I suppose, and also the age I was when these games were still relatively new, although they had been out a few years before I started really playing them, as I mentioned earlier. Anyways, let's see what we got. Breakthrough to new levels of computer role-playing. I love these things. They create a little bit of a, a little time capsule of back then. We got some of the other games in their series. Eye of the Beholder, which was a dungeon crawler kind of game, done more like Wizardry, I believe, yeah, where you see it from your character's perspective the entire time and you're going through the dungeon. And I still need to play it. I believe they actually released a Game Boy Advance version, so maybe I should actually pick up that for my Game Boy Advance SP and play it on there. We got Buck Rogers, which is, I think, the only non-Dungeons & Dragons licensed game that they used this gold box engine for. And of course, a couple of the games that we have in here: Secret of the Silver Blades Part 3, Part 1, Curse of the Azure Bonds. I'm guessing the next page in reverse order will be the first one, Pool of Radiance, yep. Which I forgot to mention earlier, when they say that it is the original AD&D computer fantasy role-playing epic, as far as computers go, they mean it. Pool of Radiance, unless I am incorrect, I believe I am right, holds the distinction of being the first Dungeons & Dragons licensed computer or video game ever. Then we got the Dragonlance ones that they did after the first 4 Forgotten Realms ones. Oh, yep, the clue books here. Yep, caught between a rock and a hard place. Up a creek without a paddle, nowhere to run to, nowhere to hide. Cliche or not, if you're stuck, you're stuck. Sometimes no amount of magic, no enchanted weapon, not even a laser pistol, I guess in the case of Buck Rogers, can get you out of the fine mess you find yourself in. Yep. So yeah, they got all the clue books here, $12.95 a piece. I imagine if I wanted to complete this collection and eventually get the clue book for Curse of the Azure Bonds, if I can track it down, I'll probably have to pay quite a bit more than that, so it's not something I'm in a hurry to do. Oh, I remember this. I think one of the Commodore games that we had in this series actually had this very same leaflet, which if you notice, it actually will specify on some of the games here that they're available for other systems other than DOS PC games. So you got IBM, Commodore 64, Amiga, Apple, Macintosh. This is a catalog for all their games on every platform at the time. And I actually remember this one here specifically from the one that we had before that I mentioned, Dragonlance Dragon Strike. And I remember it because I remember looking at this picture when I was a kid and thinking, wow, that looks awesome to be able to actually, like, ride on the back of a dragon. But that about wraps it up for now, everybody. If you enjoyed this unboxing video and would like to see more, my video from last month featured not one but 2 unboxings. I also have a now out-of-date video where you can check out a ton of my old computer games that I've collected over the years, if you'll forgive the plug. But anyways, just so I can prove that I actually am getting some work done on other projects, as you'll see from this wonderful still of the late Alan Rickman from the Robin Hood portion of the video. Which placing will the Robin Hood soundtrack be? You'll have to find out when I eventually finish the darn video. Thanks again, and everybody have a great day.
If we be adventurers, let us adventure! Go for the eyes, Boo! Go for the eyes,